In 1943, a 61-year-old farmer in rural Kentucky cut his hand on a rusted plow blade. By the third day, the wound was black. The nearest hospital was 40 miles away, and penicillin, which had just been invented, was being shipped almost entirely to soldiers overseas. His wife walked out to the edge of their yard, pulled up a handful of a weed most of you sprayed with poison last summer, crushed it between two stones, and packed it into the wound. 9 days later, he was back behind the plow. That weed is still growing in your yard right now. In fact, if you're over 45 and you live anywhere in the United States, I can almost guarantee that 11 of the 12 plants I'm about to show you are within 30 feet of your kitchen window, and you have been paying good money to kill them. Stay with me until number 4, because that's the one the U.S. Army issued to medics in the trenches of World War I. And do not skip number 1. The Cherokee called it the wound that heals itself, and modern lab tests confirmed exactly why. I'm going to count them down from 12 to 1. Every plant on this list has real research behind it, and by the end of this video, your lawn will look completely different to you. This video is for educational and historical interest only. Always talk to your doctor before treating anything at home. Number 12. Clavers, the plant that clings what you can't see. Let's start with the one that clings to your pant leg every time you walk through tall grass. The Old English called it clivewort, the plant that clings to you. Today, most folks just call it sticky willy or cleavers. It's that soft, sprawling weed with tiny hooks all along the stem that makes it stick to fabric like Velcro. Here's what almost no one tells you about it. Modern researchers put cleavers up against 7 different kinds of harmful bacteria, including the 2 germs behind most skin infections and stomach bugs, and found the plant slowed all of them down. Something inside it was fighting back. But that isn't the interesting part. The interesting part is that monks in the 1200s were already using cleavers for one very specific thing. Those swollen glands under your jaw that puff up when you're coming down with something. They didn't have a word for the lymph system. They didn't need one. They just knew this sticky little weed made the swelling go down. 900 years later, science finally caught up and explained why they were right. How to use it. Gather the young stems in April or May, before those little hooks get tough. Do not boil them. Heat kills the good stuff. Instead, tear up a big handful, drop them in a mason jar of cold water, and put it in the fridge overnight. In the morning, strain it and drink 1 small glass on an empty stomach. It tastes like cucumber water with a whisper of fresh-cut grass. But wait until you see what number 9 does for stomach troubles. That one surprised even the researchers. Number 11. Ground elder. The weed the Roman legions refused to leave home without the Romans were the most careful soldiers in the ancient world. Everything they carried for a reason. And in every fort they built, from England all the way to Germany, they planted the same weed on purpose. We call it ground elder. Goutweed. Bishop's weed. Modern American gardeners consider it one of the worst nightmares you can invite into your yard. The Romans considered it non-negotiable. Here's why. Ground elder holds a natural compound that fights germs in a way that's different from most modern medicines. And that difference matters. Today's bacteria are learning to shrug off our strongest drugs, but they've never had to face this plant. Anything that attacks through a door bacteria don't know about is worth a second look. The name goutweed isn't an accident either. Roman generals used it for the swollen, aching joints of men who ate too much meat and drank too much wine, which was pretty much all of them. How to use it. Only the youngest leaves gathered before the plant flowers. Once it flowers, the goodness drops and the bitterness rises. Sauté the young leaves in butter for about 90 seconds, no more. It tastes like a cross between fresh parsley and young carrot tops. 2 down, 10 to go. And number 7 is the one your grandmother probably used without ever telling you. Felfenheal, the plant that named itself. There's a plant growing in your lawn right now with a small purple flower shaped like a little hooded monk. In old Europe, they called it self-heal. Carpenter's herb, woundwort. They didn't name it self-heal because it sounded pretty. They named it that because when you cut yourself with a chisel and packed the crushed leaves into the wound, the cut closed clean. When you had a painful sore inside your mouth that wouldn't go away, you chewed the leaves and the sore healed up. What makes self-heal special is something in the leaves that doesn't kill germs the way you'd expect. Instead, it stops them from getting a foothold in your throat and gut in the first place. It's like locking the door before the thief even reaches the porch, which honestly is even better than fighting them off after they're inside. Now here's what really gets me. The Cherokee used self-heal for sore throats. Chinese healers, on the other side of the world, used the exact same plant for the exact same thing. Two cultures separated by an ocean and a continent, with no way of talking to each other, both looked at this little purple flower and said, this is the one for a sore throat. How to use it. 1 heaping teaspoon of fresh leaves and flowers in 8 ounces of water just off the boil. Steep for 7 minutes. Add a spoon of raw honey. Drink at the first tickle in your throat. Sheep sorrel. The reason your great-grandmother never got an ulcer. Sheep sorrel. It grows in the sour, neglected corners of American lawns, the same corners you've probably tried to reseed 3 times and given up on. Here's what makes it remarkable. Those small, arrow-shaped leaves hold something that goes after one of the toughest bugs in the human body, the one behind most stomach ulcers and a good chunk of stomach cancers. That germ is stubborn. The standard treatment for it uses 3 different drugs at once, and it still fails about 1 in 5 times. And it's failing more and more each year. I'm not telling you sheep sorrel replaces that treatment. Nobody honest is claiming that. But the fact that a weed growing in your side yard holds something active against one of the meanest bugs we know, that's worth stopping to think about. Sheep sorrel is also one of the 4 herbs in the old Essiac tea recipe. The tea an Ontario nurse named Renee Cass learned back in the 1920s from a native Ojibwe healer. Whatever you believe about that tea, the point is that the native people of North America identified sheep sorrel as medicine long before any European set foot on this continent. How to use it. A few leaves tossed into a salad. Or a small tea, 1 teaspoon of dried leaf in a cup of hot water, no more than once a day. Sheep sorrel is sour and strong, so if you've had kidney stones or gout, skip it entirely. If your grandmother ate a sour salad in early spring, sheep sorrel was probably in it. She may not have known why she craved it. Her body did. 8. Wood sorrel. The cold-pressed wound wash the Irish monks kept secret. Different plant, similar name. This one is wood sorrel. The little 3-leaved clover look-alike that closes its leaves at night like it's going to sleep. The Irish monks who kept European medicine alive after Rome collapsed used wood sorrel in nearly every wound wash they wrote down. What makes it work is what happens when you crush the leaves. You get a sharp, sour juice that pulls the edges of a cut together and leaves behind a surface that germs have a hard time living on. Now here's the part that 95% of herbal websites get flat wrong. You cannot heat wood sorrel. The moment it gets hot, the good stuff cooks right out of it. You end up with a nice, sour, useless tea. The monks knew this. They didn't have modern chemistry, they just knew from experience. So they pressed the fresh leaves cold through a piece of linen cloth and put the raw juice straight on the wound. The juice comes out pale green, a little thick, and sharply sour on the tongue. It also happens to be one of the highest sources of vitamin C growing wild in the northern woods, which is why Irish sailors who couldn't get oranges or lemons still didn't come down with scurvy on long voyages. They were chewing this little weed on the ship. You can eat it too. A small handful in a spring salad tastes like clean, cold lemon. Now we get into the plants with the deepest research behind them. Number 7 is one you've absolutely walked past this week. 7. Plantain. The bandage of God, and the study nobody talks about this one is called Plantain. No, not the banana. It's the flat, broad-leaved weed with the little seed spike that grows in every cracked driveway, every worn footpath, every neglected corner of every American lawn from Maine to New Mexico. The Old English called it the road broad because it grows right in the middle of the trail. In a 900-year-old English healing book, they called it something even bigger, the mother of herbs. Now here's where it stops being folklore. A few years back, researchers at a university in England went back to that same 900-year-old book and pulled out an old recipe for eye infections: garlic, wine, cow bile, and plantain. They mixed it up exactly the way the book said. Then they tested it against one of the meanest, most drug-resistant germs we deal with today, the kind that kills about 10,000 Americans a year and laughs at most modern antibiotics. That old Anglo-Saxon recipe killed 90% of it. 90%. From a book that was written before English was even English, using ingredients from your kitchen and a weed in your driveway. And here's the kicker. One of the things in plantain, a natural healing compound in the leaves, is so good at helping skin cells rebuild themselves that it's the main active ingredient in dozens of the wound creams sold at your pharmacy right now. That's what those tubes are selling you. Pulled out of a plant, cleaned up, put in a fancy box, and marked up 40 times over. The original source is growing free between the bricks of your patio. How to use it. For a bee sting, a scrape, or a splinter, pick a leaf, chew it briefly to wake it up, and press the pulp onto the injury. The old-timers called this a spit poultice. The sting quiets down within 2 minutes. Cover it with a bandage. For drinking, cold soak a handful of fresh leaves overnight in water and drink the mild green water in the morning. 900 years ago, they called it the bandage of God. A few years back, a British university confirmed why. Number 6. Dandelion. The 500 million a year mistake. Americans spend more than $500 million a year on chemicals made specifically to kill dandelions. Let me say that one more time. $500 million a year killing the plant that the father of medicine, Hippocrates himself, prescribed for liver trouble, that Persian doctors wrote about 1,000 years ago, that Chinese royal medicine books listed for over 1,000 years, that your own grandmother probably picked as greens in early spring, because that's what her mother taught her. The dandelion, the most hated plant in American suburban life, and quite possibly the most nourishing green in your yard. Here's what we've learned. The bitter taste in the leaves and root wakes up your liver and gets your digestion moving. The root also contains a special kind of fiber that feeds the good bacteria in your gut, the same bacteria your body relies on to keep your immune system sharp. If you're over 45 and your doctor has told you your liver numbers are creeping up, the plant you've been paying good money to kill is the exact same plant that healers on 4 continents used for that exact condition. Here's a little history most folks don't know. During World War II, when coffee was rationed across the American South, roasted dandelion root was what people drank instead. It tastes like dark chocolate, campfire smoke, and wet earth. Genuinely delicious once you get past the color. How to use it. Dig up the roots in the fall, when the plant has pulled all its energy down underground. Wash them, chop them, roast them in the oven at 300 degrees until they turn dark brown and smell like coffee. Simmer 1 tablespoon in 2 cups of water for 20 minutes. A splash of raw cream and a spoon of honey turns it into something you'd order at a cafe. 6 down, 6 to go. And number 4 is the one I promised you, the plant they handed out to soldiers in the trenches. Number 5. Purslane. The weed every country eats except ours, purslane. That low, fleshy, almost succulent-looking plant that spreads all across your vegetable garden after every summer rain. Here's the fact that should stop you cold. Purslane is a normal, everyday food on 5 continents. Greeks eat it in salad. Turks cook it with yogurt. Mexicans braise it. Egyptians have been eating it non-stop since the time of the pharaohs. 5,000 years, uninterrupted. The United States is one of the only cultures on Earth that looks at purslane, calls it a weed, and sprays it with poison. We are, in the plainest possible sense, killing off the most nourishing wild green in North America. Here's what's inside it. Purslane has more of a certain healthy fat, the same kind of fat you get from salmon, than any other green leaf we know of. Most plants give you a version your body has to convert. Purslane hands it to you directly, but the reason it belongs on this list is something else. When you chew a raw purslane stem, you notice it's a little bit slippery, almost like okra. That slippery quality is exactly what makes it useful. Bacteria in the body sometimes build a slimy shield around themselves, like a little fort, to protect themselves from medicine. That shield is why antibiotics sometimes stop working. Purslane appears to help break down those little forts, meaning it may help other medicine work better. And it's growing in the cracks of your driveway. How to use it. Raw in salads with tomato, red onion, and a splash of good olive oil, or sautéed for 90 seconds with garlic. Don't overcook it. Heat destroys the good stuff. It tastes lightly salty, lightly sour, with a satisfying crunch like a young cucumber. 4. Chickweed, the weed the U.S. Army issued to medics. Here's the promise I made at the beginning of this video. In the trenches of France in 1917, the American Army ran short of wound powder. So the doctors on the front lines went back to an older manual, a military plant guide printed in the 1890s, that listed common chickweed as an approved remedy for boils, abscesses, and slow-healing skin infections. Chickweed, the soft little weed you've pulled out of your flower beds 1,000 times. What makes chickweed extraordinary is what it can do that none of the other plants on this list can. It is the winter plant. It sprouts in October, keeps growing under snow, and is often the only living green thing in an American backyard in February. Meaning, when your grandchildren catch something in the middle of a January cold snap, chickweed is the one plant on this list still available to you. Everything else is frozen solid, and it works. Modern testing has confirmed that chickweed goes after several kinds of common infections, including the stubborn ones behind some urinary tract infections that keep coming back. Now here's the preparation detail that separates the folk remedies that actually work from the ones that don't. The medicine in chickweed lives in water, but it can't take heat. The mountain folk in Appalachia figured this out generations ago. They warmed crushed chickweed in lard at a temperature no hotter than a warm bath, about the temperature of a comfortable soak, for 6 to 8 hours. Then they smeared it on boils, abscesses, and diaper rash. They called it poor man's medicine. It worked because the temperature never got hot enough to kill the good stuff. Almost every modern recipe you'll find online tells you to simmer it. Simmering destroys it. How to use it. For drinking, cold soak a handful of fresh chickweed overnight in water and drink in the morning. It tastes surprisingly sweet, like the tender inside of a young corn kernel. Nothing like the medicine it is. If this is landing with you, if you're starting to see how much has been forgotten, hit the subscribe button now, because the last 3 plants are the ones I most want you to remember. 3. Sting nettle, the plant they wove into World War I bandages. Stinging nettle. Yes, it stings. The whole plant is covered in tiny needles that inject a burning cocktail into your skin the moment you brush against it. It is one of the best defense systems any plant has ever come up with. It is also quite possibly the most nourishing wild plant in North America. Nettle has more iron than spinach, more calcium than milk, ounce for ounce, more vitamin K than kale. And inside the roots there's something else. A natural substance that appears to lock onto the outer coating of certain drug-resistant germs and break them down from the outside. Here's what most people don't know. During World War I, Germany was cut off from its supply of cotton by a British naval blockade. So the German army wove nettle fiber into the bandages for its soldiers. They did it out of desperation. But historians looking back have realized something remarkable. Those bandages were quietly releasing the plant's natural germ fighters straight into the wound. Passive medicine built right into the fabric. They didn't know it. But their soldiers were healing on medicated bandages, 30 years before penicillin was even discovered. How to use it? The sting disappears completely with 30 seconds of boiling. Take the young top 4 leaves, never the older lower ones, dip them in salted boiling water and use them exactly like you would spinach, in risotto, in soup, in eggs. It tastes like spinach with a deeper, more mineral flavor. The dried root, simmered for 15 minutes, has been used in European folk medicine for 400 years for one very specific problem: an enlarged prostate. Modern studies have looked into this and found it actually helps with the nighttime bathroom trips that plague men over 50. If you are a man over 45 in America, you have paid good money for prescription drugs that do what a weed in your backyard has been doing for 4 centuries. 2. Yarrow. The herb Achilles used on the battlefield. Yarrow, the plant with feathery leaves and flat white flower clusters that smell like sage crossed with warm camphor. The name is not a coincidence. In the old Greek stories, the hero Achilles carried yarrow into battle to pack the wounds of his soldiers. The Romans called it the soldier's herb. The Cherokee used it, the Navajo used it, the Norse Vikings used it. Every major army of the Old World on every continent independently arrived at the same plant for the same reason: stopping bleeding and preventing the wound infections that killed as many soldiers as swords did. Now here's what modern research has confirmed. A team of Greek researchers tested yarrow against one of the meanest drug-resistant germs we have, the same kind that kills people in hospitals. And they found yarrow held its own against one of the strongest antibiotics we've got, the one doctors reach for when everything else has failed. I want to be careful here. That was a laboratory test, not something tried on people. Nobody is telling you to skip your medicine and drink a cup of tea. What I am telling you is that a weed growing free in the field behind your house holds compounds serious enough that a research team put it in the same conversation as one of our most powerful antibiotics. And here's the part I find most fascinating. Yarrow doesn't just fight germs directly. It appears to wake up your own immune system, the white blood cells that hunt down invaders in your body. In other words, yarrow doesn't just fight the fight for you. It hands you a sword and points you at the enemy. That is something no modern antibiotic does. How to use it. 2 teaspoons of dried yarrow flowers and leaves in a cup of hot water. Keep the cup covered while it steeps for 10 minutes. The good stuff floats away with the steam if you don't. Strain carefully. The taste is complex, bitter, aromatic, with a warmth at the back of the throat. Drink it at the first sign of fever, chills, or the flu coming on. Achilles wasn't waiting for a clinical trial. And number 1 is the plant that will change how you look at the most stubborn weed in your yard. 1 ground ivy creeping Charlie, the weed that refuses to die, and won't let you die either. You know this plant. You have absolutely pulled it out of your garden in frustration. Most people call it creeping Charlie, or ground ivy. The Old English called it alahoof. It's that low-spreading vine with small, round, scalloped leaves and little purple flowers in the spring. Here's what those Old English brewers knew that we forgot. Before hops became the standard ingredient in beer around the 1500s, brewers all over Northern Europe used ground ivy, alahoof, to flavor beer. But more importantly, they used it to keep the beer from spoiling. That's where the name comes from. Ale hoof, the plant that keeps the ale alive. The reason it worked is a natural preservative packed into those little scalloped leaves, something so strong that it kept a wooden barrel of beer safe to drink for months. Now here's what modern researchers have discovered about that same substance. It goes after the kind of germs that live in the worst places: deep wounds, dying tissue, infected gums. The kind of places where regular antibiotics have a hard time working because there isn't enough oxygen for them to do their job. Ground ivy doesn't need the oxygen. It works in the dark corners. The old Anglo-Saxon healers used ground ivy for exactly that. Wounds that wouldn't close, sores that refused to heal, flesh that had started to go bad. Read that again. That is precisely where this plant appears to shine the most. They arrived at that knowledge through 1,000 years of watching carefully. We arrived at the scientific explanation about 15 years ago. And here's the second finding. Ground ivy appears to help new blood vessels grow into damaged tissue, meaning it doesn't just kill the infection, it helps rebuild what the infection destroyed. The old healers described this in poetic language. They said ground ivy drives out the poison and calls back the flesh. Modern science backs that description with uncomfortable precision. How to use it. Gather the fresh leaves in April, May, or September when the plant is strongest. Do not use boiling water. Hot tap water is enough. Steep 1 tablespoon of fresh torn leaves for 8 minutes covered. The flavor is unlike anything else on this list. Mint and sage are cousins in the same family, and you can taste that in the leaf. But ground ivy adds something forested, something resinous, like the floor of an old wood after a rain. For putting on the skin, for slow healing scrapes, small infections, and the stubborn skin issues that come with getting older, a cold overnight soak makes an excellent wash. Cold works better than heat for this plant. Ground ivy asks nothing of you, not watering, not fertilizer, not protection. It asks only one thing: stop killing it. Hongorilla. Before you leave this video, there is one thing I need you to understand, because it's the reason most people try an herbal remedy once, get no result, and decide the whole tradition is nonsense. The medicine in these plants is fragile. The healing part of plantain starts breaking down within hours of the leaf being cooked too hot. The germ-fighting substance in nettle root falls apart if you boil it, which is why the serious old preparations of nettle root are always cold-soaked, never brewed. The best part of Creeping Charlie isn't even water-friendly, so a plain hot tea only pulls out a small fraction of what's in the leaf. The old Anglo-Saxons put it in beer and in salves for exactly that reason, even though they had no idea why. Here's the deeper question these 12 plants leave you with. How much of what we call folk medicine that doesn't work is actually folk medicine that was prepared with modern shortcuts that destroyed the medicine before it ever got used? How many times has someone tested an old remedy, gotten nothing, and thrown out the whole tradition, without realizing they used a method the old healers would have known better than to try? The plants survived everything we threw at them. The knowledge of how to prepare them is 1,000 times more fragile than the plants themselves. 12 plants. Every single one of them either growing in your yard right now, or within a short walk of your front door. Every single one of them older than the varsity, older than the hospital, older than the country you and I live in. If this video changed how you look at your lawn, I want you to do 3 things. 1. Hit the subscribe button. Healing Harvest exists to bring this kind of knowledge back, carefully, honestly, and with the research behind it. There's more coming, and I don't want you to miss it. 2. Send this video to one person you know who spends every Saturday morning at war with their lawn. They deserve to know what they're killing. 3. Tell me in the comments, which of these 12 plants is growing in your yard right now? I read every comment, and I want to know. Your yard is not a battlefield. It is a pharmacy. And it has been waiting patiently, generation after generation, for someone to remember that. I'll see you in the next one.